welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again. It is the first episode of the month, and therefore it is Request Week here at the Metal Exchange as we go back to 2006. We cover Frost's debut album, Milliontown. But before we do all things Frost related, how are you, my friend?
Really good. I was on a walk earlier this morning, and I was thinking to myself, like, already planning ahead as to what I wanted the social media blurb to be on Sunday night / Monday morning for this episode. And pretty much what I came up with was, when somebody writes a song with your names in it, the least you can do is take his request. And so that's what we're doing this week.
Nice and well-deserved, and a band I'm actually excited to talk about for a lot of reasons. But I'll get to those and everything Frost momentarily. Before we do that, I want to break some news that had just kind of come out. Dream Evil has released a new single, which, at least for me, was completely out of left field. I had no idea they were recording new music, but I say this because it's also on the heels of them being announced for the 13th time to play the Prog Power USA Festival in Atlanta, although all signs point to them actually coming in just a few months. But that being said, Metal Gods released just yesterday as of the time of this recording. Did you have a chance to listen to it? And what were your thoughts on this track?
I did. I thought it was kind of what was to be expected. Nothing really out of the ordinary, but it sounds like this is going to be the first track from a brand new album. It's been 7 years since their sixth album, aptly named Six, was released. And I have to wonder if the delay in announcing them for Prog Power was to coincide with the release of this single, because the fact that the announcements were only about a week apart kind of seems to make sense. But a lot of people are very excited about this announcement. This is I think the fourth or fifth attempt to get Dream Evil over to the U.S. to have their U.S. debut and play at the festival. So I'm hoping that it sounds like everything, the visas are done and everything is ready to go. So let's see. That Wednesday night lineup at Prog Power, I think, is one of the best day one lineups they've had in a few years. Really excited to see Circus Maximus, honestly, above all, but also Angra, get to see Dream Evil finally, and then Victorious and Darkwater are filling out the rest of the lineup. So it's a really nice mix of prog and power, and I'm really looking forward to day one. I didn't attend day one the previous 2 years, but I will not miss it this year for sure.
Yeah, agree with you on the lineup. I thought that this song was okay. I've only listened to it once. It's good. I was so pleased, I guess is the word I'll use, that when we had our Patreon group chat earlier this week, a lot of folks were very excited for this band and for this announcement. So I am truly thrilled for them. I hope that they enjoy the show. I will be there. I will not miss the set. I'm just curious to hear what they sound like live after all these years. But it's good to hear that there's new music coming out. I think that'll be an album that a lot of people have an eye on, especially after the, I'll call it a hiatus after all those years. So kudos to them.
Yeah, I will say I'm a big fan of Nicholas Isfelt's vocals. I think he's a really excellent singer. So I'm hoping that he can bring
delivery.
Yeah. I'm hoping he can bring it live. And I wonder, in the last time that they were supposed to play, they were booked, or they were billed as having Snowy Shaw as a guest, because he was the drummer from 99 to 2006 for the band. So I'm wondering if maybe he gets the invite to rejoin his old band. I think that would be fun, because he's always a hoot.
to say the least. He's got quite the personality. But all that's definitely a highlight and something I wanted to mention. Another band that released a single, which I actually really enjoyed, was the new Flotsam and Jetsam single. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to Primal. This is a band that I'm absolutely late to the party to. It's a band that had just such a massive discography that I really only got into them. And I mentioned this on the episode where we covered them, that I had only started listening to them the last few years. With their last few releases, I guess I'll say. But this song, I just thought was kind of in your face, very accessible, but the chorus had some hooks that I enjoyed. And if this is an indication of what the album is going to sound like, we're in for a treat. So, did you have a chance to listen to the new Flotsam? And obviously, what are your thoughts there as well?
I did. It was very good. I am going to definitely give this one a listen. My knowledge of Flotsam and Jetsam pretty much is their most recent album and their first album that we covered on the podcast. So there's a lot in between to kind of catch up with. I defer to a resident Flotsam expert, Charles, to give us the direction on where we should head the next time we cover them. But yeah, it's a good kind of thrashy tune. This band, I think, has really done a great job at like kind of evolving over the course of several decades. Their first album came out in 1986, and they're still kicking. So cool stuff. I definitely made a point to listen to it, and I liked it. So yeah. Very good stuff.
And just to note, their new album, I Am the Weapon, comes out September 13th. So it's we're starting to get all the singles for like the late summer and early fall releases, which just kind of shows you how fast this year is going. So I'd be remiss not to mention that. And then, of course, another band that's actually playing Prog Power released a new single, and that is Leprous. Now, this single that they just came out with, the song is called Atonement. It's from their album Melodies of Atonement, which comes out August 30th of this year. This was kind of a divisive tune, and I say that because it had a very like electronic feel to it. The single wasn't as, I don't know, it certainly didn't sound like their old material, but it didn't really sound like their last couple of albums either. There was an evolution here, and they were bringing in some electronic elements that they hadn't used. So I know a couple of folks in particular had kind of said, oh, have you heard it? I wasn't crazy about the tune, but honestly, I thought it was pretty good. I think it's going to take some getting used to. I'm still partial to their old sound, but at the same time, I can speak from experience.
That's because you have the tall poppy syndrome.
That's right. And ever since I got, ever since I caught that, it was off to the races. But they're so good live. I mean, just such a good live band that it's going to be curious, or I'll be curious to hear this material in a live setting, especially because of the sound effects and like the electronic elements that I mentioned. So it's going to be a good time no matter what. And that album comes out just days before we see them, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like they're. I'm listening to the track right now. Funnily enough, I didn't find out about it until late last night. I was laying in bed and scrolling through social media, and I saw it, so I downloaded it, and then just haven't gotten a chance to listen to it. So I am listening to it now, and it's got the unmistakable Einar vocals, but yeah, it's almost like they're channeling their inner Vola a little bit and going a little bit in that direction. So I imagine we'll be hearing some new material from them at Prog Power, like you mentioned, but I don't dislike it. I've listened to about 2 minutes of it while you were talking, and it's pretty solid.
Well, it's like, I guess the tune clocks in at about a little under 5 minutes. So I should have filibustered for another 3 so that you could listen to the whole thing. But kidding aside, I think that I do think that they've moved into a more accessible direction. I think that those first couple of albums, although I like them a lot, they were very quirky and very proggy and took some time to kind of marinate and digest, whereas this, I think, is a little more accessible off the bat. I'm not going to say it's Vola accessible, but they're moving in that kind of direction. I thought that was an apt comparison. Yeah,
and also it just seems like Leprous has done a good job at kind of evolving and not releasing albums that are derivative, and I like that about them. To me, Leprous has always been that weird band where like I would think that I wouldn't care for them, but I always end up liking them for some reason. Them and Haken are like my favorites of like kind of the new wave of prog bands. I guess not that new anymore, but it's just something I've always enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to seeing them at Prog Power this year. You pretty much like named I was going to mention Dream Evil, Flotsam, and Leprous, even though I hadn't heard it yet. But so I'll mention a pair of melodic metal bands that both released singles recently. Kiss and Dynamite released another single from their upcoming album Back with a Bang called The Devil is a Woman. And Eclipse released a new single called Falling to My Knees, which I do not know if that is supposed to be on an upcoming album. But it is the second, the second single that they've released recently. good God, there's a lot of bands named Eclipse. I just went to metalarchives.com and there's like 20 bands called Eclipse. Like I'm just trying to get a little information here. All right, let's go to the Swedish one. There we go. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's anything as far as a new album, but they do have 2 singles, Apocalypse Blues and Falling to My Knees, as I mentioned. So both those tracks from Kiss and Dynamite and Eclipse are pretty much what you'd expect, just enjoyable, boppers from, 2 really established melodic metal bands. So those are the 2 I'll mention. And even though it's not really a single or even all that new, I will say I've been going back and listening to the new Elvalon album. Like, I think I've listened to it like 4 times now. And there's a track on that album called A Legacy Divine. They would probably do well to release that as a single because that song is absolutely amazing. It's one of my favorite songs I've heard this year. So if you're looking for something to listen to that's a little different, throw that track on. And if you like it, give the album a listen. It's I've been really impressed by it. And I would be very surprised if it doesn't make it to my year-end list when the time comes. It just seems like the releases are getting better as the year goes on. It's kind of a slow start this year, but we're going places.
Yeah, no, I agree. That album is one of the bigger surprises this year. So definitely worth checking out. And that song in particular was just a real highlight for me. So I'm with you there. I want to thank all the new listeners to the show. We obviously appreciate it. If you want to make a request like Richard did, please join our Patreon. All the info can be found at our sparkling new website, metalexchangepodcast.com. I would recommend everyone check that out and give us a like and a follow. Tell a friend. It helps everyone find the show. But with that all being said, let's talk some neo-prog, shall we? We are going to talk about Frost, a band that, while they've not released a ton of material, I think has been kind of an underground success in many ways. And I say that because this band kind of came along around the same time of the bands that you kind of mentioned, the Hakens and the Volas and that sort of a thing. And although it's not really in that vein, there is a lot to like about this band. I'll start by telling you that I remember when this band first came on my radar at this time, and I think I was just so inundated by stuff that was like the Opeths of the world or stuff in that vein that I never gave this band its due, props, I guess, in many ways. I had been listening to a lot of Enchant. I had been listening to a lot of Spocksbeard, stuff that's squarely in the same vein as this, but for whatever reason, I would check out a song or I would listen to an album, but I never really did a deep dive. So I was so happy to go back and kind of check out this debut album because there is some really interesting material on this release. It's only 6 songs, but there's a lot of stuff that's accessible and I guess appealing to somebody like me who really is at its core a prog guy.
Makes complete sense. I want to say that you told me about this band years ago because I remember listening to this album and like I mentioned last week, like I had listened to it, but it was a while, like a decade ago. But I remember it sticking out to me, like thinking to myself, I kind of dig this. So when Rich requested it, I wasn't terribly I was surprised or unfamiliar with it. So it was cool to kind of go back and revisit this after all these years. I don't know that I would have otherwise. So I'm glad that he requested it. He did send over a pretty lengthy blurb about it. Would you like me to share it with the group?
I'll do the honors. I'll read it. He says, back in 2006, I remember reading about this UK pop writer producer, Jem Godfrey, who had just released a prog rock album. I had heard a few of the songs he had been responsible for, and my expectations were pretty low. And also what I considered quote unquote prog often differed to what was touted as prog in the media. At best, I thought I'd be hearing some sophisticated pop akin to Peter Gabriel or Stupid Dream Era Porcupine Tree, which, time out, that album is great. Don't knock Stupid Dream Era Porcupine Tree. But I understand what he means. It's not quite It's more poppy with prog elements than it is like full-on prog. But he goes, I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the neo-prog groups, with a few exceptions. But Spock's Beard without Neil wasn't doing it for me, and most of the other bands were doing stuff that was very derivative of the 70s prog greats. I can't disagree there. So I gave this band Frost a go and was really impressed with the combination of, at the time, modern-sounding production, hooks, and Jem's amazing keyboard playing. Technically proficient, but always catchy. One of my faves. I think a lot of the guitar was already recorded before John Mitchell joined the band, but I was already a fan of his. But some of his lead work on this album is also top shelf, and I should note that Rich is a guitar player by trade, so high praise from him. Most of the music on this album is quite uplifting, whilst the lyrics are quite dark, which makes an interesting contrast. The title track is based on the book The Apprentice by Gordon Houghton, pretty much about a guy who is raised from the dead and for the purpose of being death's apprentice for a week, with life, quote unquote, the reward for being or doing a good job. Pretty sure the parts are supposed to represent each day of the week. Not the greatest 25-minute epic of all time, but it still works for me. This album was the facelift the genre needed at the time, at least for me, and the band has remained one of my faves since. My song of the week, which I'll get to later, is kind of how he wraps up his quote, but we'll talk about that in greater depth when we go into the album. But a nice review. It's funny. My sentiments, and I'll just kind of talk about my overall impressions before we do a deeper dive into the songs themselves. I don't think that Rich is saying this is Images and Words or the most transformative album that he's ever heard, that it's a 10 out of 10, but I think I agree completely when he says that it was almost a shot in the arm for prog at the time, and that there's parts of this album that if you are a prog fan and have never heard this, it almost puts a smile on your face and gives the genre or neo-prog some new life. So I completely understand that, and I happen to think that he's right. It's a very enjoyable listen, although I would not say it's it wouldn't have been my album of the year in 2006 or even today, but it was just something that I thoroughly would have enjoyed and would have made any like year-end list, if that makes sense.
That's kind of how I felt about it when I first heard it. I was just kind of like, oh, this is very refreshing. I think that's the right word. Especially because, like, at the time, it probably wasn't 2006 for me, but like maybe a few years later. I think that my love of like modern or current prog music was lacking. This was probably before, like I'd mentioned earlier, like Haken and Leprous would come on the scene and kind of invigorate my enjoyment of the genre. So like to me, I was like, well, this is kind of cool. And the way Rich described it is that, yeah, it has kind of like an upbeat kind of feel to it, even though that the subject matter might not be upbeat itself. I just remember hearing it and be like, this is the kind of prog that I enjoy. And I remember looking it up and I don't think I had ever heard of neo prog, at the time. So I was kind of curious as to what that meant. I guess I'm kind of still a little bit curious of like what makes it neo, but unless it was on the Matrix soundtrack, I don't know if that is the case or not. But all I know is that I enjoyed it then and I enjoyed it now. It's and I'm glad that Rich chose it because it's one of the nice things about the requests. Typically, is that usually the requests aren't like. The people that request them aren't like, oh my God, this is one of my all-time favorite albums you need to cover. It's kind of like, this is an album that I think would be interesting to discuss. And so discuss. And I think that's kind of where we're at here. But this was to me, like considering that there's a 10-minute song and a 26-minute song, I thought it was pretty easily digestible in spite of that.
Yes, I agree. I want to just touch on one of the things you said. I think that the quintessential band when you think neo-prog is Marillion, which is another band that we probably should cover. But neo-prog is a little bit different, I think, than the rest of progressive rock in that it's really about the composition and the songwriting. It's less about the jamming and the wankery for the most part, and I think more about the song, but it's going to have your clean vocals. It's going to be very melodic. It's going to have guitar solos that are very emotional, almost like a Pink Floyd type of guitar solo. But you're also going to get those keyboards, which are just very lush and very rich and very much, and very melodic, right? And so I think that is to say that a lot of the neo-prog bands, although, you're talking about just a little bit of a more straightforward twist, not throughout, but just a little more straightforward when it comes to the choruses and the verses, where you're not looking at like, again, some of that wacky stuff that was coming out in the 70s, which I also enjoyed, but it's a little bit different. And what I never realized, and I'll fall on the sword here, is that this band in many ways was a supergroup of other neo-prog bands that I've been listening to for 25 years. Bands like Arena and IQ, and bands like It Bites, which, if you've never heard, again, I think that they all kind of fit within this umbrella of neo-prog because of the reasons that I kind of just mentioned. So I guess it makes sense that this was going to be a culmination of all of those things and then some. And, I guess it would just be, I'd be remiss not to mention that the band, even though they were only been around for, the last 20 years or so, they have, I guess, been blessed in that they have 4 full-length, albums and then a new one that's on the way. So this band is still alive and still active, and they've done some major tours both in the U.S. and abroad. So they're alive and kicking. But just so we know who is in this band, in the very early formative days, you're talking about Jem Godfrey, as I mentioned, on vocals and keyboards. He was kind of the mastermind behind this thing. John Mitchell on guitars and vocals, John Jowett on bass, and Andy Edwards on drums. So 4 guys got together, kind of knocked this thing out of the park, and then they would go on to achieve even more success from there.
Yeah, well said. I did not know that there was an album. Is it out, the 2024 album? Or
no, I don't believe.
I didn't even.
I know it's supposed to come out, but I've not yet heard it. I don't believe it's out. I'm not even sure if they have a release date in mind, but I have to assume it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, iTunes doesn't have anything. 2021 was the latest release in iTunes. I'll check their Bandcamp and see if there's maybe
it's not there. I actually checked in preparation for the episode, but for some reason the album is not out yet. And again, the album is tentatively titled "Life in the Wires," but for whatever reason, it is not. I don't believe it's out yet.
Okay, I'll definitely be curious to check it out when it does come out. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so, kind of with that backdrop, have you listened to any of the bands that I had mentioned, those quote unquote neo-prog bands? I know that I think we had talked offline months ago about eventually doing a Marillion album, but we just never really got there.
I think I've heard tracks here and there from all the bands that you mentioned, and I remember liking all of them, and so I think that this is kind of a style that I can grab onto and enjoy, like you said, because it's maybe a little less wanky or wankery-ish or whatever you want to call it, like prog Yngwie. I just it's interesting. Somebody on Bandcamp kind of compared the band to the Deer Hunter. I don't know if I hear that. Do you?
I don't. The Deer Hunter is another band that I like, but I think that the Deer Hunter is more alt rock almost in many ways. I don't consider them a neo-prog band. Not that the label means anything, but that is a band that I know them quite well, and I don't think they sound anything alike. But listen, some people I guess could hear different things.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, they said makes me think of the Deer Hunter, so that doesn't necessarily mean that it sounds like them. Just makes them think of it. I don't know.
Fair enough. It makes me think of the band. It actually makes me think of the bands that these guys came from, like IQ, Arena, stuff like that. That's what I hear, but with just a little bit more of a modern flair to it, because some of those bands I think nod to the 70s neo-prog or like the Marillions from the 80s, but but this band, I think they take that sound and they just kind of modernize it a bit. So it's interesting that I'll just note this before we talk about the songs themselves. The album, as I mentioned, Milliontown, came out in 2006, but what was interesting is that they actually remastered it in 2021, I believe. And what's interesting to me is I didn't really think it needed a remaster. I thought the original sounded really good. But then when I went and I listened to a track or two from the remaster, just for comparison's sake, it does sound quite sharp and clear. But I think it's just really a testament to the technology more than anything else, because it did sound good even almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think I listened to the remastered version because the copy I have, I added to my library in 2010. So,
unless you had it 10 years early, I don't think you had the remaster.
Yeah, like the time machine wasn't working at that point. So
but was the black light machine working? But we'll get there. This was what was interesting to me is that this album kind of kicks off with a song called Hyperventilate. So if you know nothing about the band and you just play this 7.5 minute opening track, you quickly realize it's an instrumental. And I have to be honest, probably my favorite song on the disc. And that is not a slight against the singing, but I just thought the song was excellently executed. What an intro. It is a song where I think every musician really got a chance to shine. And my immediate reaction was, wow, this is very much Dream Theater or like a precursor to what Haken would become. I won't go note for note because there's a lot to digest, but the bass lines around the 3-minute mark, just the melodies around the 4:30-minute mark, and the keys around the 6-minute mark are just absolutely fantastic. And I think that when it was all said and done, I said I didn't even hear Neoprog. I heard Liquid Tension Experiment on this track. A really fantastic song that could have easily been my song of the week.
Yeah, well put. It's I think it's kind of a bold move to make a 7.5 minute instrumental open the disc, but I think Liquid Tension is a really good comparison. I thought of it was like a neo prog version of the opening of Scenes from a Memory, but just kind of done in that neo prog kind of style. There were definitely parts that reminded me a lot of Overture 1928. So I definitely can understand, I think that was the last time I thought of Dream Theater while listening to this album, but this song kind of...
In many ways, this track is a bit of an outlier.
To be fair, I think I really felt like each track really felt unique. I don't know that. I feel like either none of the tracks are outliers or all of them are, because they all really have their own kind of flavor.
That is exceptionally well said. I have nothing to add to that because you're right. Every song sounds completely different from the one prior. But eventually we get to Know Me, Know You, where there's actually vocals, so that if you were thinking this is just a derivative version of LTE, you are woefully mistaken. This song kind of starts out with this bizarre spoken word intro, but the song itself kind of alt rock in many ways, and not what I was expecting. It takes a little while to get going, but it's rather cool when it does. The drums are kind of simple, but I thought very effective. But once again, the keys, and I guess it's not terribly surprising given that this is really Jem Godfrey's creation, but the keyboards are what really drive this song ahead. Very melodic, and when you use headphones to kind of immerse yourself in the sound, there's actually a low end here which drives this track along, which can kind of get lost if you're not listening to it. I think that more than anything, the apt comparison for Know Me, Know You is Spock's Beard. I like that vibe. I agree with Rich. I think that when Neil Morse left Spock's Beard, the stuff was good, but not as impressive as the stuff earlier on with Neil Morse, who's just one of my favorite songwriters. But even though this is not necessarily their best tune on the album, there's, I think, stuff here you can enjoy.
Excuse me. Got so excited to talk about this song, I choked. The keyboards are my favorite part about this band. The whatever, the different patches that they use, and the sound is just so infectious to me, and I love, me, I love synth, I love keyboards. It drives
even in your
a lot of my favorite bands. Power Quest, that. Just, I love that kind of is the driving force on a lot of the songs on this album. This is a really good tune. It's I definitely hear the Spock's Beard comparison. It's interesting. I feel like I have a different like band to compare like each song to. Has like reminds me of a different band. Deer Hunter, not one of them. I will say, but yeah, this. I definitely got kind of like a proggy alt rock kind of vibe. One of the other interesting things about the album, and you can correct me if I'm. Well, actually, I'm not even going to boldly pronounce anything. Maybe you can just answer the question. But are there different vocalists, or is this vocalist just has different styles? Because like it really sounds like there's multiple vocalists. Like when you compare a song like "No Me, No You" to "Snowman," for instance,
there are, and that's a really astute observation. Jen Godfrey and John Mitchell, as I mentioned, the keyboard player and the guitar player, respectively, do vocals on this album. I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly who was singing which part, but I will say this. There are songs on the album where I actually prefer the vocals to other vocal stylings on the album. I think No Me, No You is one of my least favorite vocalists or vocal performances on the album. That's not to say it's bad. I think it actually fits the music well. It's just not my preferred sound when I think of vocalists, whereas some of the other vocal impressions on this album actually blew me away. This was not one of those tracks.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's interesting about halfway through the song, it just kind of goes into like chaotic prog mode. But this is kind of it's a cool track and a really interesting counterpoint to the opening, instrumental track that I think was a little bit more straightforward. Prog a la Dream Theater. This, like you said, has a little bit more of like a kind of a chaotic radio type alt rock kind of tune. But like I said, like the keyboards kind of drive the song, and it's cool. It's a cool song. But like when you go over to Snowman, the first of all the entire song is like a completely different style. But you immediately can tell that like the vocals are very different. So either that was my thought, was either this guy is really talented and can throw his voice in different ways, or this is just somebody else. But oddly enough, the vocals reminded me of Sleep Token.
Yes, I was thinking that. You are not wrong. And so obviously this is not your song of the week because I know how you feel about Sleep Token.
Yeah, but it is. It is my song of the week. I really like this song, and I think the reason for it is the weird kind of off-putting keyboard sounds that almost sound like dissonant flute notes. It reminded me of like in a more modern sense, it reminded me of Porcupine Tree, but also kind of like late era Beatles, like Pink Floyd, like real like late 60s, early 70s kind of prog music. I don't know what it is about this song because I do not like the vocals of Sleep Token, but for some reason this song just worked for me. It's kind of like haunting and like kind of like mopey in a way, but I don't know, for whatever reason it was like the song that resonated the most with me. So I think it's funny that you said that, because it's actually really is my song of the week. It was it's the shortest song on the album, so I think that made it like a little bit easier to digest. But it's really the melody and just the tone of the keyboards and everything that really drew me to the song. It's like a really I don't know if I want to say emotional. I can't think of the right adjective I want to use. Maybe I'll think of it while we listen to a clip from it. But like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I vibed with this one, and I was wondering if I knew you'd be surprised, but I was wondering if you had chosen this one as well.
I was shocked. I thought for sure you were going to pick another track, which we'll get to. But that being said, let's give it a listen, and we'll come back. I've got some thoughts I want to share myself. But this is Snowman by Frost.
Starving sun in deep November, it cannot feed us anymore, leaving us this dark reminder of things we should have done before.
So that was Snowman by Frost. Shout out to Ryan. I'm so shocked that you enjoyed this track. It's like this awkward little ballad, and the vibe, just the overall feel that the keyboard brings, is really interesting. But to your point, I actually prefer the vocals on this track. I think the whole song is very spacey, atmospheric, and the way I would describe it is I think I like this song more than I should, right? Like on paper, I don't think this is a very like profound tune, but there's something about it which just keeps drawing me in. And then there's
it reminds me of like my favorite like Porcupine Tree or Blackfield kind of songs. They're like the quirky, weird ones that for whatever reason just they click with me. That's kind of what it made me think of.
I'm with you. I think it's great. I think there's like this acoustic guitar sound that kind of shines through at certain points. It's just a really interesting tune more than anything else. Not my song of the week though. Where on the other hand, Blacklight Machine, which not only is Rich's song of the week, but it's my song of the week as well. This to me was peak Frost, at least for the debut album. Instrumental song aside up front, this is a 10-minute epic, but it doesn't feel 10 minutes at all. This song moves really, really well. The guitar effects at the beginning scream Vola, and I don't even think Vola was a thought at this point. I don't think they were putting out albums in the middle 2000s, but this is another really tight atmospheric tune. But what makes this kind of the complete package, the total package, the Lex Luger of this song is the beautiful chorus that just, I loved it. I thought the chorus was phenomenal. I think that there's these beautiful extended guitar solos as you get deeper into the tune, along with the drumming, where it's not quite as simplistic as some of the other drumming, but it's really like proggy drumming, which I'm a big fan of. And then finally, it's the bridge, right? This bridge with the atmospheric sounds and the vocals behind it almost give me vibes of Spock's Snow, where Neil Morse was just at his songwriting peak. So I love this song. It's long, but it never feels old. And my I guess, challenge to you is finding a minute of this song that kind of encapsulates everything I just said, because it's a 10-minute track and it's kind of hard to whittle it down to 60 seconds.
I don't think it's possible just because of how, like, there's just so many different styles. I really like kind of towards the end where it kind of goes into like that. I love chaotic kind of prog stuff. It's why I liked Haken's first album so much. Like I call it circus prog because it just sounds like there's, I don't know, it's like Jordan Rudess. Just there's like, it's just like chaotic keyboards and all this wildness. And so I dig that, that part. But yeah, this is a good tune. I could see why, Rich chose it as his, song of the week. Did they swap tracks on the remastered version? Because I had The Other Me as the fourth track on my version of the album.
I don't think so, but to be fair, I was also listening to the non-remastered version, so maybe just my iTunes things. I don't know, but I wound up grabbing the remastered version, but I decided to. Maybe I just configured it the same way for completion's sake or what have you. But regardless, my song of the week is Blacklight Machine. Me and Rich in lockstep on this one. Let's give it a listen, and we'll come back with the rest of the album. So that was Blacklight Machine, our song of the week. I wonder if you have any other thoughts before we get into the next track, The Other Me, which is the shortest tune on the album, which clocks in at just under 5 minutes.
No, I don't think so. Although I do believe Snowman is a little bit shorter, but
Okay. Fair enough.
yeah, I think that this is I get it. Like this is, I think, just I think it has all of the elements of a prog album that you'd want to hear. So I definitely get it. It probably would have been my choice as well. This or Hyperventilate, the opening track, if I didn't choose Snowman. But yeah, good tune, and I think you and Rich really painted the picture better than I can. So
I was surprised that you didn't choose The Other Me. I always try to guess, at least informally, what your song of the week was, and I thought it was going to be this because it has a really modern vibe with another catchy chorus, but it's not overly self-indulgent, and I think that the keyboards during the chorus almost have like a video game feel to it. So I said, "Oh, he's gonna be attracted to this." But it has that modern sound, but almost again with alt rock leanings. I actually heard a lot of Nine Inch Nails on this song, and it reminded me of when we covered them in the archives, especially in the different like samples and patches that they use. My knock on it would be that it's a little repetitive. It's kind of the same thing over and over for nearly 5 minutes, but I did find it enjoyable and rather catchy for what it is.
it reminded me of two bands that we covered in the past that couldn't be more different. One of them, you mentioned, Nine Inch Nails. The other one was Faith No More. Because of like the kind of funky, kind of feel to it. The way in my mind I describe the song is funky industrial rock.
Nice. But again, it speaks to the fact that every track on this is so different than the rest because, again, nothing sounds like this but for this particular track.
So, to be honest, it probably was it might be my least favorite track on the album, to be honest. I don't dislike it. I just think I preferred the other tracks, to be honest. But I'm going to just go off the record here. Your responses are so surprising to me when it comes to this album that it's actually kind of formulating my next pick, because I'm saying to myself, if you feel this way, you may like what I do next time. So like you're making the wheels turn. The little mouse on the wheel is like running in my head right now. So kudos to you. Well, I would just warn you to not try to find logic in what goes through my head. So
I didn't say anything about logic. I just said that I was going to form my next.
Well, if you're building into like 2 + 2, the answer might be 9. So just be aware.
Fair enough.
I will say, I think of all the tracks on the album, this one might have been the most radio friendly or like kind of accessible. It has kind of like, I don't know. It reminds me of something that would have been on the radio. I can't put my finger on exactly what, but I could definitely see the appeal, and it might be like a good starter track for somebody who isn't really into this type of music. I feel like if you gave them Hyperventilate, they might actually hyperventilate.
Couldn't agree more. If you gave them the last track, the self-titled Milliontown track, I think they'd also hyperventilate, not because of the complexity necessarily, but just because of the fact that it's 26 minutes long, and I think the least digestible track on the album. For somebody like myself, I can deal with it. I'm used to it. Like long songs, Sand Off the Beach, right? But for somebody who's listening to this for the first time, I could see why this would be a bit jarring. It is really multiple tracks in one, but when you put it together as one cohesive piece of music, it can be a lot. But it is certainly an epic close, and even me, it took me quite a few listens to appreciate. I didn't love it the first probably 3 times I heard it. By the 4th listen, I think it started to click, and I think I probably listened to it 5 or 6 times over the last week. So what really stand out again are the extended intro, which is basically just keyboards and some of the better vocals on the album. Loved it, really big fan. And when the band kind of finds their mark a little ways through, again, very much a Spock's Beard type of sound. But what I liked about this, and I thought it was a nice contrast to the opening tune. Every instrument again is kind of standing out on their own merits here, but it's not overly self-indulgent at all, and it doesn't even sound overly complex. But every instrument has a chance to shine. About 7 minutes in, I think the song takes this like catchy little turn, which gave me impressions of Enchant, that would just the way that the song continues to build and stuff like that. Around the 12.5 minute mark, it gets really quirky and somehow remains digestible, which is a really talented way to write a song, because usually if you go quirky, it turns people off. But for some reason, I still thought it was rather accessible in and of itself. And then what I also enjoyed was towards the end, about 18 minutes in, it actually picks up speed, which is kind of the first time on the album where they really ramp up the RPMs, if you will. But it was nice to see. And what I loved is that the keyboards towards the end of this track gave me Streets of Rage vibes. We talked on our most recent Patreon episode about some video game soundtracks, and I mentioned those games for the Sega Genesis, which were revolutionary for the time in terms of
solid tie-in, Justin. Well done.
But accurate, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was really, I thought, a very ambitious tune. Certainly no lack of chops, but well done. Not my favorite song on the album. Certainly not a change of seasons, but a nice way to end it.
I toyed with making this my song of the week, and then I was like, oh God, then I have to pick a minute of this. Like, how am I going to do that? It's just like, first of all, thank you to Dream Theater and Fates Warning for kind of laying the groundwork for me being used to listening to songs of non-radio length, I'll say. But I feel like the band took a lot of the best aspects of the first 5 tracks on the album and kind of rolled it into this one epic multi-part thing. And it has a little bit of everything, I think, and it's all really enjoyable. It's put together really well. I like this song a lot, and I agree with you. It took me, a number of listens to kind of digest it all, because it is quite long and there's like a lot of different parts. I feel like it might have been easier to like break it up into, if they had broken it up into like separate tracks, and might be a little easier to, but I think you did a good job of kind of breaking it down and like, mentioning different, time stamps throughout the song. But, it's just a prog epic. I didn't have enough time to listen to this whole track earlier, so I had to listen to the last 8 minutes while I was taking a shower, and I came up with oh God, this is why I need to start writing things down. Oh yes, that's it. Just came back to me. It's a prog journey. Like this song is just it's a journey. Like it's just this really great long. It just feels like you're going on this great journey of all different types of prog sounds. That like some of it reminds me of Sleep Token, some of it reminds me of Dream Theater, some of it reminds me of Spock's Beard. Like it's really cool. There's not a ton of vocals, a little bit of vocals, but not a ton on this song. It feels like it's
largely
mostly
instrumental.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, compared to the rest of the album for sure. But, I gotta say, like my closing thoughts on this thing, I'm looking forward to the new album. I really want to hear it.
Me too.
I'll be candid when I say I didn't love Day and Age, which came out in 2021. I thought that this album blew their last album out of the water, but I'm back on the bandwagon. I need to go back and I need to listen to Experiments in Mass Appeal, which I think by maybe highly regarded as their best album, which was their second release. But I'm certainly looking forward to Life in the Wires, and certainly when it is announced or when the release date is announced, we'll make sure to inform everyone of that, because I'm on the bandwagon. I really enjoyed this listen.
Yeah, I'm looking at my library, and I only have the 2 albums, Milliontown and Experiments in Mass Appeal, in full. I have one track from Falling Satellites and one track from Day and Age. I remember probably the song I knew the most by this band was Toys from Experiments in Mass Appeal. for whatever reason. Yeah, I guess I have to bone up on my Frost back catalog, and I definitely agree with you. I want to check out the new album when it finally drops, whenever that is supposed to be. For whatever reason, this band is not the easiest to obtain information about, because they're too, I guess, prog rock to be on the Metal Archives page, and they don't have a super descriptive Wikipedia. So I guess we'll have to dig in and see if they have an official website somewhere. If so, I will post it in the show notes, as we always do. But yeah, it's so funny, because I always, for a band that I'd never listened to a ton, I always remembered liking them for whatever reason. And so it was fun to kind of revisit them.
Well said. And so I will kick it back to you for the question that I ask every single week here at the Metal Exchange. Scale of 1 to 10, what are you rating Milliontown?
Would you be shocked if I told you that or if I said that I'm rating this album slightly below Evergrey from last week?
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't. We're doing more dissection next week. I mean, I don't know what's happening. This is
not by a ton. Honestly, by the narrowest of margins, I gave In Search of Truth a 7.875. I'm going to give
never
this
gave
album
In Search of Truth anything, because we haven't covered it yet. But you gave the inner.
Oh,
yeah.
I put it in the spreadsheet incorrectly. So
no problem.
I'll fix that. I assume I will give In Search of Truth a higher score than that when the time comes.
I would, but I say that to say
the Inner Circle. I don't know. It's a good thing I listened to the right album last week.
That would have been even funnier if we were covering two separate albums. But so what did you give it last week? I don't.
Yeah,
recall.
so I gave Inner Circle a 7.875. I'm going to give Milliontown a 7.75. So like literally an eighth of a point.
Nice.
Lower. It's just I found it very just even. Like straight from start to finish, it was just a very even keeled experience for me. I very like above average, very solid. It's not like my go-to to listen to, but at the same time, it was like very enjoyable for me. So 2 weeks in a row of some prog that you might not have expected me to like that much. Both getting pretty good scores on my end.
Nice. I'm glad you liked it. It's getting a solid 7 for me. I don't think this is an album that I would, again, put up there with the Operation Mindcrimes of the world, but at the same time, it was a very enjoyable listen, certainly above average, and one of those albums that kind of opens the door to other music by the band and whatnot. I definitely want to do some more neo-prog stuff in the coming weeks and months and years ahead, bands like IQ and stuff like that, just because I think that if you like this style or you seem to be enjoying it, I think there's other stuff out there that's even maybe slightly even better that you will really gravitate towards. That is not to say that this album isn't good, but just that there's other albums in the genre that are even more remarkable. So that puts a bow on Frost's Milliontown. Just a couple of news items that I wanted to mention. We don't talk a lot of death metal on the show, but Nile has announced their first new album in 5 years. It's called The Underworld Awaits Us All. It is due out later this year, and I believe it's August 23rd. It's coming out on Napalm Records with many tour dates to follow. This is a band that is on the road tirelessly. What I like about these guys, and I'm not the biggest Nile fan, but I do think that they are more melodic than other straight-up death metal bands that kind of just are played a million miles an hour. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And another band that we had covered in the archives, Wasp, is going back out on tour. They're touring with Death Angel, which I thought was an interesting pairing, if you will. And they're playing their entire debut album on this tour, which has a lot of their biggest hits, like I Want to Be Somebody and Love Machine. So really, really interesting stuff. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was the one we actually covered in the archives when we covered this band. So it's going to be a real interesting tour. Again, my one complaint having seen them last year was that all of Blackie's vocals seemed to be piped in, and so it wasn't the best show I've seen, but nonetheless, I do like this album quite a bit.
Nice. I did want to mention something earlier that I forgot to mention, and thankfully you said put a bow on it and reminded me of our friend Steve Scott. And Steve reached out to me, and we had a nice little chat about Freedom Call, which is a band that he has been kind of working with, not as a musician, but kind of doing camera work and helping out with like lyrics and stuff like that. And he had said, he asked me if I would kind of talk about my feelings about the new Freedom Call album, Silver Romance. And I got to be honest with you, like, I'm not saying this because he asked. I'm saying this because I truly believe this is my favorite Freedom Call album in a while. I really like this album a lot. I've gone back to it a number of times. Steve asked me what my favorite track is. I haven't decided yet. There's a lot of really good tracks, but it really does. I feel like Freedom Call has kind of gone in directions. They've like done like kind of funnier songs like Mr. Evil and like have gone kind of sometimes in a goofier route. I feel like they're kind of back on the track with where they were in the early days. I like this album a lot, and so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it because I probably my favorite Freedom Call since Beyond, which came out about 10 years ago, which I think was another one of their stronger efforts.
That album was fantastic, and this I think is in a very similar vein.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because I think it's very good. I think I may have glossed over it when it first came out because I've kind of gotten into the habit of mentioning singles more often than actual full albums, and I need to keep that in mind. But this is definitely one of my favorite albums of the year so far, and I would be, again, much like the Elvalon release, I'd be surprised if this doesn't end up on my list. It's really a question of how high versus if it is on the list at all.
Nice. Well said. I think that wraps up this one. I want to talk briefly about what we're doing next week. I think it's going to be a special treat. You want to reveal what next week's album is?
I absolutely do. We have had a friend of ours join us on the podcast twice. Actually, that's happened now twice. We have two, what do you call it? Two people that have returned to the podcast. Mr. Olaf Thorson and his top flight internet connection, and Ash Edison, formerly of PowerQuest, currently of Tiger Tales and Dandera. Better internet connection. Might be just the UK. But anyway, Dandera has a new album coming out called Mask of Lies, which is their first full-length album in a while. I think since Pillars of Creation was released in 2015. I believe everything since then has been EPs, and they did a live album a couple of years ago. But the new album is called Mask of Lies. It officially releases on June 14th. Ash was kind enough to give us an advance copy of the album, so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive in their new release. It's been a while, I think, since we've talked about something brand new. I have to say, so far, I really like it. And I believe Ash will join us later in the week to discuss it, possibly with some other members of the band. But that's the plan for next week. So looking forward to talking about the new Dandera album. I know Ash and the rest of the band are very proud of it, and they're. I don't know if you knew this, but Satchel from Steel Panther has a guitar solo on the album. I guess Ash made a friend when Tiger Tales played with Steel Panther in the UK. So it's I believe the song was damn it, I forgot. He told me which.
Drift Away.
Yeah, I think it is Drift Away. Yeah, he had mentioned that, so I think that's really kind of a cool thing.
Any appearances by Sticks It In You, or is that not on this album? Maybe the next one.
That's this is a family show, Justin.
That being said, I look forward to this as well. This was an interesting album for many reasons. So we'll talk all things Dandera next week as we do a new album, and then we will, in all likelihood, dip into the archives again in the weeks and months to come. Again, thanks everyone for listening. We appreciate the support. We hope that you enjoy what you hear. Give us a like and a follow. And with that being said, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go listen to some music. I want to actually put the new Freedom Call on. I listened to it a couple of times, but I'm due to give it another listen. So, thanks for sparking that interest. I look forward to that. As always, they are a band that I was so happy to see live on 70K just a couple of years ago. I'm hoping that they hit U.S. shores again in the not so distant future. We're due for some more Freedom Call stateside.
Yeah, I want to say they've never actually done a U.S. tour before, which is kind of crazy because they've been around for 25 years. So I'd say they might be due. I'm kind of surprised they haven't like latched onto a Gamma Ray or a Halloween tour over the years or something like that. Could have just been a timing thing, but they definitely deserve to get out there and do a little US tour. Yeah, it's, I'm glad that, Steve reached out, but, to be fair, I definitely had the album already on my radar as one of my favorites of the year so far. So, hopefully you enjoy it even more when you, go back to it. Cause I just, they never cease to just put me in a good mood whenever I listen to them. They have just that ability to just kind of perk
nature
you up.
of the songs, I think, just uplift the spirits, and that's why I love to call it, flower power metal, because it just puts you in a good mood. But enjoy the week.
I love a good power metal infection.
Enjoy the week, my friend. I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Sounds good, dude. Take care.